Corre el verano. Antes, aquel 19 de abril, un nuevo nombre llegaba a los libros de historia. Años de trabajo en la provincia y luego cargos nacionales fueron configurando al dirigente que el mundo veía recoger las riendas de una revolución que ha influido en el mapa político global, pero especialmente en el sur. Una revolución que habría visto la posibilidad de una pausa de la agresión en los últimos meses del gobierno de Obama, que recibió un abrazo de amor a sus 5 hijos, y que enfrenta ahora, como en el pasado, la tensión con quien ha sido su enemigo. Historic enemy. Cuba changes itself in several times and moments. Regarding the rhythm, its people needs the rhythm of times global complexity demands. We reach the Havana in a pause of its work, at the same scenario of power, and we sit in front of a key man on the island. From the Palace of Revolution in the city of Havana, Cuba, we greet the president of this country. Thank you very much, President Miguel Diaz-Canel, for accepting our invitation in teleSUR in Spanish and English simultaneously. You've been in office 4 years. How would you call those months?
Well, first of all, I would like to greet teleSUR, the audience of this channel, which is a very important channel in order to create the content that is required in our America. Well, this have been some months of a lot of experience and months that have also led to a lot of insight. After the Constitution Assembly of the 9th Legislature of the National Assembly of the Popular Power, where there was a speech, a programmatic speech from the General Raúl Castro, the first Secretary of the General Committee of the party. Then we started to study, to reflect about the guidelines that this speech was about. And we carried out a collective exercise with the Executive Committee of Ministers and also with the Minister Council in order to see how we can bring this down to the government's work. And we drew some conclusions that we have tried to implement so far. First, answering this concept for this government to be of the people and for the people, which is also being a government for the revolution. So there were 4 fundamental pillars, and we've shared them with the people. One, beyond the example, the branches of the government should have the capacity to show what they have done for the people and with the people. And secondly, after accountability, is the constant debate and dialogue with the population, to be at the places where the most complex issues are, in the places where things are more difficult. The third pillar is for the leaders in Cuba to be able to use social communication.
There will be a transcendent change there.
Now we're in the midst of the implementation of social communication that has been already approved. And this will update all our media system, but beyond the media and journalism, our culture of communication required by the country.
The communication supply?
Exactly, the supply of communication, the interaction between the people and the government through the media, through social networks. We want to state the first stage of presence in the electronic government of the country that is based in all the digital platforms that from the government allow us to interact with the population and also to allow them to interact through these platforms in order to make decisions.
People at many times has been very critical of the revolution in its way of communicating. Is this going to change, be transformed?
Well, first of all, the Cuban press, under the conditions that it has been needed to challenge for communication, has been a type of press that has always defended that revolution with a lot of professionalism and efficiency, but also we've seen demonstrations of maybe too much apology at certain times. In some points, we haven't been able to show some of the topics of the public agenda. So we need to match the public agenda with the agenda of the media, but also the role of the media creating content. Today in the world, contents are required, contents that lead to demobilize the perverse one for colonial restoration they try to impose. And I always say, if our main audience is the youth, whose communication codes is not the traditional media, however, social networks, and these social networks have a lot of contents that change the reality of our peoples, that also distort the identity and the culture of our peoples, then it is necessary for us, from our communication platforms, to flood this media with the contents that highlight our people.
To communicate with the youngest sectors of the Cuban society?
I think that it is a need for the revolution. Fidel was the one doing this first. He went to the universities when he wanted to discuss a problem. He used to meet people in a square in Havana during the first years of the revolution. For me, it has always been a need, since I was a director for the youth, when I was the secretary of the party in 2 different provinces, and also when I was the minister of higher education. At those points, getting to the youth that always brings something new, and we need to know about what they want as well as their disposal to participate. So this communication is the third pillar that should be in the exercise of these four, while the fourth is that the leaders should see that the solution to our problems are very complex. So we can't have a single option. Each issue should be tackled with different options. Fidel also thought about this statement, and the only way to make this more effective is with scientific research, from investigation to look for innovation, because often we investigate, however, don't have anything concrete, and change science into information for the society and use this as a tool for problem solution, for this to be one of the pillars that every leader works for.
Is your opinion based on those 4 pillars of going to the province, meeting the people on the streets? I've seen images in the last hours of your walking around the Cuban provinces. People greet you, deliver you letters, ask you to resolve problems, and I even listened something that is not very usual, ask from presidents, is there are problems that we would not be able to resolve. This is a sincere, absolutely sincere expression to say that they are problems that overflow us.
This is all related to the insight I told you about, the ones that came after the speech of Raúl Castro. We realized that there was a link in the chain that needed to be strengthened in the management of the government, which was the relation between the central government and local governments.
It has to do because you come from the province.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is great for any Cuban leader who works in national directorate, has had the experience of working in provinces in different territories, because locally you're able to define the national programs as well as the fundamental programs for the revolution, but you also need to defend and create politics based on the problems of the communities, the problems of the different cities. This is something very important today, the autonomy that we want to give local governments under the Constitution project that we are debating. So, speaking about strengthening the relationship between the central government and local governments, we have given powers to the first vice president of the council to have a formal structure that directly tackles the interaction between the central government and territories. So governments know that they can directly go to the office of the first vice president in order to look for solutions or to let us know about the problems that are beyond the framework that they can achieve, and to complement these relationships, among other mechanisms, we have created the system of visits of the Ministers' Council, at least twice per province per year. So going to at least 2 provinces per month. This is also one together with the National Assembly of the Popular Power to also systematically visit the different local municipalities. And thus, we are able to see what's the pull of the people, of the state of mind, as well as the thought of them. We're able to talk to the people. And when solving problems, I always say, first, creating this dialogue should always be an honest exercise and should be based on the truth.
Has your perception changed about the problems of the country after these visits around the province, or have you confirmed the core problems?
I think that central problems are confirmed. We can also tackle specifics, but mainly we're able to dynamize solutions. There are problems that are so big that they don't have an immediate solution. But every day, if we go one by one, we can solve a part of the problem. So the problem is not growing, we're making it smaller. And this constant performance creates a synergy of solutions, and it doesn't stop you, it goes forward. There are other problems that can be solved immediately because they're based on a decision of the bureaucracy or a lack of sensitivity towards a given problem. And people are the ones who tell us about this in this dialogue. And some problems we have to tell people that honestly are beyond the capacity of the country.
Does it exceed?
I think that the main obstacle for the development of the country, what actually strikes the day-to-day life of Cubans, as well as the economy and the social life, is the blockade that has been imposed by the United States. This is a brutal practice. I think it is a crime against humanity. It attacks a people. It is a people that's been deemed to die of famine, and there's even an imposition of regulations in the relationship of the world to Cuba that are beyond our country, and this has worsened lately. And there's also a very important economic persecution, so the investment flow to Cuba is very difficult, even for those who have the greatest will, because there's a lot of pressure by the government of the United States towards them, and it's a blockade that has been in place for already 60 years. I wonder, my generation, we were born during the first years of the revolution. Just because we were born in Cuba, we've seen a blockade against us. Our children, our grandchildren have been born in the conditions of blockade, which are conditions of resistance. Also, there's an acknowledgement to the heroes, how a small country that was blocked by the most powerful nation of the planet, and we were able to endure and to build our own platform for emancipation that highlights, and I think that there's an expression not only of endurance but also of victory.
What percentage, in your opinion, do you have in that the construction of solutions to the problems the people are stating in the province and in the capital now and today, talking about the blockade and what Commander Raul Castro called free the knots? How much do you have your own knots, internal knots?
The blockade has a great effect because when you try to make something international of the social life of a country and you try to understand which are the parts that are blocked, well, they are related to a big blockade, but there are other subjective ones that are related to behavior. They have been conditioned by the lack of trust that is created because of the blockade, and for this insistence of the blockade where you have to constantly defend yourself, your country, as well as analyzing which step you should take in order not to be distracted. So this sometimes slows down the decisions, as well as the way of facing things. The agenda has the commitment to try to avoid anything hurting or weakening the country. And at the end of the day, there's always an explanation about the blockade. So some may say that we are obsessed with the blockade, but I say the opposite. Those obsessed have been the governments of the United States. We want to live in normal conditions of any country. We are not a threat for anyone. We have a will for a social justice, to build a better world, to create a better country. And even this perspective for the social justice that we have always seen now under the current conditions, we want to accompany it with a society with prosperity. And the main obstacle is the blockade.
Project of constitutional reform, the following block of this interview with the Cuban president. But I would like to state the question. A fundamental action not to have this prosperity that the Cuban people aspires and expresses to you. What are you discussing a new charter for? Why are you reviewing if an essential factor comes from abroad? Let's take a pause, President. We'll be back in simultaneous English and Spanish with President of Cuba. We're back. Today we are in Havana, Cuba, with the president of this country in his first interview with any media, and we thank you very much for this exclusivity. I left a question in the last segment if there are many data that prove that the Cuban Revolution has shown the impact of the blockade on the population. If it's so important, and if the answers come from what happens abroad, why then are you debating a new constitution? Is it truly necessary?
Question. And it brings together different elements of our reality. For them, to resign to the blockade is not dependent on us, it depends on the government of the state. So we cannot be subject, with our need for realization, our endeavor for social justice, for prosperity, to what can be exercised as the policy for a government that comes from abroad. We are aware that we are dependent on our own forces, on our effort and our will, and also on our endeavor. And during last years, there's been a very intense debate in the 6th Congress of the party, and after that, it was strengthened in the 7th Council of the party about the problems of the society and the economy. And we come to the conclusion that we need to update this based on the blockade. Everything would be better without a blockade. Thus, we are prepared and we try to do things better in the worst case scenario, which is the one related to the blockade. And we've made some decisions that update the economic and social model. We have conceived and acknowledged a non-state sector of the economy.
Growing a lot?
Yes, it is growing, and it complements the state's economy. And it's not the private sector of neoliberalism. It's a non-state sector, a private sector that complements what is created from state-owned enterprises that are related with the state-owned enterprises and with the state. They are part of the economy, of our planning, and how much it provides to the GDP, how much should be invested in this sector for it to be able to produce and provide services, and what's its ratio in the workforce as well, in the country, of course. Thus, it is implicit as part of our economic programming for all our projections as well. And it's a sector that is also committed in its majority with the revolution. We've even gone beyond, not only acknowledging private property as well as the existence of this private sector, but we've also moved forward with the management of some state-owned properties through non-state ways of managing it. So there's some state-owned property that is managed by non-state enterprises, either through cooperatives or private workers, but never granting the ownership. We've also broadened our vision about civil rights, human rights. we have been able to fulfill, and we've signed different agreements internationally that weren't part of it before. They weren't specifically drafted in the Constitution as the way of thinking of Cubans on topics that were taboo in the past, or that maybe were thought in a different position. Today they have a different approach, particularly in the population as of today. And then we started to get into a limitation. Yes, some crossroads from the institution with the things that we're trying to experience, the things that we're trying to do. That's the constitutional reform was required. And first of all, it reinforces some of our statements, our convictions. We continue with state-owned property as the most important one, even though there are others. And there's some rights, and we acknowledge the role of the party in our society. And we also try to have more autonomy in municipal governments to solve these problems of working with the central government with a better structure.
A more pragmatic view of the country, of your reality?
I think that it's a responsible perspective, an objective one, a realistic one. Elements for a renewal that have already showed the guidance of the 6th Congress that were then ratified in the 7th Congress that are perfectly drafted in the concept of the social economic model of Cuba, that today is supported by the Constitution, which is the autonomy for the municipalities. If we are to grant them autonomy, we need to have a structure that doesn't limit what can be carried out in the local development by the representation of municipalities. And for this, we're trying to modify and in the provinces have the coordination of the government and management coordination and so the representative in the
let's say it's the vision of the state administration, but it's not necessarily the topics that are creating debate in the Cuban population versus your new project of constitution.
I think people are understanding and assuming this as a need. It's not a step back. They see it as the opposite. And the debate about this, either through the governor or through the intendant, there's a debate.
Another word as well, if the country will continue being communist or not. Did the society resign to being communist?
Well, I think that we need to put together different elements, different philosophies, different aspects of science, and also theory, as well as other objectives related to objectivity. I'm not a specialist, but from what I've studied and based on my arguments, if you take a look at classic Marxism, the means of production that we want to have is socialism. Socialism and communism are closely linked together. If you want to create socialism, it is because you eventually want to become communist. And if you speak about socialism, you're understanding
Don't you understand this as a resign?
No, we're not resigning to it. Both terms imply the other. However, if we're going to create a constitution that is closer to what objectively can happen, today we're closer, and this is the immediate objective to create a socialist construction, which is complex and wide. But if we would like to have communism, we'd have to create a construction that is independent on a single country, that depends on a construction that happens internationally and globally. In my experience, where I've participated in different assemblies for popular debate, when we just visited the provinces, and there is so much wisdom in our people. There is so much responsibility in how people have taken over this debate, and this ratifies something that was once said to me by a friend, a poet, who said, "No one knows more than all of us together." He also said, "There can't be so many people wrong." I think that the constitution we have today, which is a good constitution, people acknowledge it, is going to be strengthened when we include the aspects that are going to be brought by this popular debate. and the decision will be based on the elections.
But we wonder why, if the revolution is even capable of revising and building society, communist or socialist society, you do not revise other polemical, controversial topics like a single party, in this case the Communist Party. Why do you not debate this? Or did you, and we don't know?
Okay, Patricia, there's something quite interesting about this. And even jokingly, we think about this. Those who are concerned whether it's going to be socialist or communist aren't the Cubans. They are the ones from abroad. Some people would rather have a communism or socialism more like gas, even though we've been attacked with this. And this shows the double standards that can be seen when we try to see the Cuban reality and we don't see the historical events. I think that all the topics in the Constitution are up to debate. Some of them have a majority, and others have a minority that doesn't agree with this. And others create a consensus because there's a diversity in the opinion. The management of the Communist Party in our society that we are not resigning to and which is supported by the majority of the people is based on our history. And sometimes this historical foundation is not understood in the Cuban reality because we often see what's the role of the Communist Party in our society as an electoral party. However, the conditions of Cuba don't have an electoral party. It is based on historical reason. Martí founded the Revolutionary Party, which is the basis of the Communist Party of Cuba today from a historical point of view. Not in order to create a party for the elections, no. Martí wanted to create a party to face the revolution, to create a revolution that was going to bring independence, sovereignty to our people on the basis of unity. A party that was going to be as open and democratic to include the interest of the majority based on the independence and sovereignty, and to avoid any type of rupture. Our history has always been based in unity. When we see history, whenever there's been a fracture in our unity, we've seen things happening against our government. The first war of independence, the War of the 10 Years, a long war. We're going to commemorate its beginning, its 150th anniversary. And in its 100th anniversary, Fidel defined something that was extremely important. The revolution in Cuba has been a single one. That's why the continuity is perfectly conceptualized there. And this revolution didn't only show the beginning of the independence, it also showed the beginning of the struggle of the Cuban people, and there's been a single struggle. The 10-year war, which was a very long and heroic war, didn't end in a victory due to the separation at the end. It ended with an understanding, an agreement with Spain. Then there was another campaign for independence and a war which was called the Small War. Guerra Chiquita didn't become a bigger war because of the separation. Then in 95, when we already had the thought of Martí, together with the participation of the Revolutionary Party of Cuba, as the axis, as the driver of this war, there was an intervention of the United States with a republic that was under the media due to the lack of union. And in the midst of this, there was a movement for the revolution, for progression, with deep convictions that brought the most important intellectuals and the youth of Cuba in the 30s. It was called the Revolution of 36. It was stated that it went to Bolina, and it went to Bolina because there wasn't any union. And the revolution won when different forces got together. Fidel unified these forces and kept them through a long period during the first years of the revolution, brought to the union within the Communist Party of Cuba. So it's not an electoral party. It is a party of a revolution, the party of the people, the party for union. I am convinced that the enemy of the Cuban Revolution knows that its main target to defeat the revolution would be to fracture our unity. And that's why they bring their main proposals of subversion. And they send this towards the youth, because we now have a generation that has a time difference of over 60 years with the moment when the revolution triumphed. So it's a revolution that had already assumed the achievements as a right. They see them as natural. They do. They didn't lead the first years of the revolution. My generation felt the first years of the revolution. They saw how harsh these years were and how the country progressed with this policy, and where we had a very stable time during the 80s. And then, since the end of socialism, we underwent the special period, but our children and grandchildren born in the special period.
And that generation, Mr. President, is not aspiring to more diversity, other media, other political parties, other electoral offers, and communicate with the world.
This generation has many aspirations for the country to develop faster, mainly because it's a generation educated by the revolution with the benefits of general education and higher education, with the possibility of understanding this culture. It's a very well-cultured generation, very well-educated, and thus they have aspirations. It's an active generation, a participating generation. I think that the main aspiration of this is not being against the party or against the revolution, and an important part of this generation feels identified with the revolution and with the party, and this is not their discussion. They want to have more progress. They want to speed up progress. They want to become a part of the participation. They also want to have technological development, the development of information. They are also very different in their perspective of social communication. Well, there's also quite a lot of diversity there, but they're aware that they would lose all their benefits that have given to them by the revolution as a generation if they would lose unity. So it's a very strong generation, a generation that doesn't want any division. It is a generation that is not willing to stop the revolution, and they don't want to be attached to another country. They defend independence, sovereignty, and they want to consolidate it. And it is a generation that will provide continuity to the revolution.
I have two topics of the internal debate on the new constitution. The topic of the limits of property and wealth that I think is very interesting, and I understand by the comments in social networks that it generates quite amount of concern, and also gender. We're going to talk about this in the next segment. I want to know the opinion of the president of Cuba, but the third and last segment, we will also talk about international topics, situation now, and the structural relation between this country and the United States. Will it be possible, a meeting between President Diaz-Canel and President Trump? teleSUR and simultaneous English and Spanish transmission on all our platforms. We're with the President of Cuba at the Palace of Revolution, President Diaz-Canel, who has awarded us with his first exclusive interview to communication media. And we've devoted the first two segments to talk about internal debate inside Cuban society, not necessarily a debate that started with your administration, but that, of course, finds in you the protagonist of those discussions.
Among the many topics that the new constitution would bring, there are two that generate contradiction and controversy outside. There are many headings. One has to do with the limit of property and wealth. What is your position versus this?
Well, I wouldn't like to influence this debate with my own particular opinion, and this is because I am part of the commission that, directed by the General of the Army, was in their responsibility to create the constitutional project. So I agree with this project, and I am also open to anything that can be improved in this constitutional project by incorporating the things that the people are incorporating. This is very well related to the things that we mentioned previously in this interview. The youth and also the rest of the people, there's a lot of pressure in order to defend the concepts of social justice, of equality, that have been built by the revolution. So people, legitimately, I think that is a legitimate position, are deeply concerned about the concentration of property and the concentration of wealth.
That in Cuba, has this happened with the implementation of the economic model?
I don't think that there's any federal space to have a concentration of property and wealth based on our regulations, on our norms, and how our country works. But with this situation of our economy, where the salary is no longer as important as it was, where we have a relation between the salary and their price that are quite complex, and we go back to the topic related to the blockade, where there are people who get a given amount of income that is not based on work, and this is the reason by which individuals are distinguished and their income comes from. So these people with this aspiration, they defend against the concentration of wealth and property. And an article shows explicitly that no concentration of property would be allowed. When we drafted this, we always thought that without the concentration of property, we couldn't concentrate wealth. So we have the mechanisms in the law to have control over property and wealth. In the popular debate, well, people are not asking us to take away this article. However, the opposite, to explicitly state that there should not be any concentration of wealth or property. I always believe that in the constitutional debate, not only people provide their input for the Constitution, they're also showing aspects that then should be stated at how we're going to implement the Constitution with the law. We need to have a long legislative exercise to set laws for the approval under the Constitution to avoid any type of gaps in our code and to understand what our people want to have in the Constitution, which is the minimum law, the greatest hopes that's shown in their minimum exposure, to have them in the laws and the procedures that support the law. The discussion, however, we've been discussing this for a month. We need the input of some very important sectors as the students, as the youth, as the academia.
Now they start classes.
Yes, classes are about to start, yeah. But this undoubtedly is an article that will have to draft differently. It's not an article we have a contradiction in content. We all agree, or the majority agrees, that we need to limit the concentration of wealth and property. The discussion is what should be in the Constitution and what should be in the laws and procedure. And here, just like in every other article, debate and popular wisdom will have the final word.
The reaction of the conservative sectors in Cuba on on the topic of including in the new constitution the civil rights to marriages of the same sex?
This is a debate that has been established clearly during the last years because the country has changed, conceptions have changed as well. The country evolves. We are inside a bubble. And also, we are facing the reality. I think that the emancipating will of the revolution also opened new perspective of thought. There's a humanistic will based on the revolution, and during the last years that we have been through, there's a great evolution in thought. Many taboos have been broken that were previously things carved in stone, and the youth are pushing for this because they see several problems in a different way. I previously said that the criteria that I am speaking, what I'm saying about certain articles.
Have given their opinion publicly on this article. It's valid to think to see the president's opinion.
Listen, but everyone has their own idea, their own conviction. But we're also open to what the people can say, because we haven't done this just to artistically build a fake country. We've done this out of our conviction, because the victory of the revolution, and every time that we have said something for popular debate, we've strengthened the revolutionary action. So,
do you agree?
I agree. I believe that above all, the approach of acknowledging marriage of people without any limits answers to a problem of eliminating any type of social discrimination, of not allowing any space for any type of discrimination in society. So with this will, people take a look at different elements surrounding the acknowledgement of this type of union. Well, first, some defend this from a semantic perspective, where the word matrimony comes from matrix, and matrix means mother, and the concept is valid for some people and we respect it, while others are concerned based on the facts that other elements associated to this: child adoption, the responsibility of the marriage, family responsibility, civil rights as well. There are other positions that frame certain elements, and they're the culture of the people, their thought. People that base their thought in our tradition. So, in all honesty, we can see the different perspective and opinions of the people. At the end of the day, I am against any type of discrimination, and this is one of the types of discrimination that has been there, not established by the law, but that has been part of the behavior of our society, in spite of us progressing with this. And there are certain institutions that people that have played a very important role to broaden these horizons based on the understanding of these social problems, and also problems that happen throughout the world of the humanist conception. But the decision will be given by the popular debate and how our people build an appropriate consensus on this particular aspect.
Counter-revolution is calling to vote against the constitutional project.
Yes. However, I call the people for their opinion in a citizen exercise as important as then. The opinion that you may have on a given aspect, on a given article, shouldn't take away the responsibility that as a whole as the Constitution, then they should be included. Because when we call to dialogue, it should at least include two people. Because I have my own perspective and others have their perspective, but I am subject to whatever the country wants to build. Not because I am stubborn, not because saying that if an element included, which could be one of the less important one, I will go against the Constitution and its approval. We need to understand the role that we have as citizens when we've seen the possibility.
Do you trust they will vote positively in favor of the new Constitution in February?
I think that the majority will approve it. Because debate is not an imposed conviction. It's the opposite. You were speaking about the counter-revolution, or that the counter-revolution in Cuba, the minorities that are against the revolution in Cuba, they don't answer to a national project. They are in part a desire of improving the country from their perspective of sovereignty and independence. They just want to be attached to other countries. This is paid and financed by the government or the state, either covertly or overtly. And even though they could be part of the assembly, they are neighbors, even though some would rather be outside of Cuba. It's not acknowledged, it doesn't have any social support. And when they show their ideas, a hurtful one against the revolution, against the people, then the rest speak against them, against this perspective. But listen, I've been already participating in 6 meetings. One with the foreign press that it's always speaking about the reality of Cuba. When we created the constitutional project, there was expression stating that especially the youth were apathetic on the Constitution. Now, we've had 3 editions of the tabloid, and they ran out of stock. You can even visit certain places that are farther away in certain communities, in mountains, and they request to have a higher stock of tabloid. If you go to the assembly, you see the people, and you see how people are drawing.
Text they have studied?
Yes, they've studied it, they've highlighted it. And others have a thought just like engineers, where they create diagrams, and people participate very seriously but joyfully and very committed with this debate. And if someone doesn't care about this, someone is apathetic to this, why would they want the tabloid?
This is a structural debate in the Cuban society?
Another element of debate. A lot of people, mainly the elder, they see the Constitution as important not only for today but also for the future, and are also concerned about how the Constitution will give the youth the space that they require today. And this shows that there is a commitment with continuity. And on the other hand, how the youth participate. They provide very interesting ideas. But many young people in many of the assemblies, there's often some young people that go beyond their Constitution. They show their appreciation for the Constitution.
We'll see what happens with this president in February when the people will vote.
And Patricia, I have an anecdote to tell you. This was a sincere event, not trying. I didn't want to impose anything. It was during an assembly. But there was a very positive answer from the people. So I was in a working center, and one of the people there spoke about broadening an article. We, of course, respected his position, but I said, listen, just let me ask of you. Please take a look. There's another article where I think that what you're saying, what you're proposing, that is of course legitimate, included further on, just for you to tell me whether you think if it's appropriate or not to keep it as is. But I would just like you to pay attention to it and see that it is also tackled elsewhere. He took a look at the tabloid and he said, I agree with what the president has said. And he said, I withdraw my comment. And I told him, don't do that. It's okay what you say. I asked him, please state it, because asking something also makes us wonder whether we need more than one article to state one thing. Then the next day, I always read Cuba Debate every morning. Other media as well, but always Cuba Debate. And there are a lot of comments. And there was a working woman from that center who said, what a great exercise in democracy we have in our country. When a working man asks something and the president answers, and then the president tells him that what he said was okay. I'm not saying this from my own perspective. This is not what I do. This is how our people work. But then there is that environment for an honest discussion, for straightforward thinking, based on respect, of course. And this brings us to this consensus. And when people don't know about the reality in Cuba, they don't know how the revolution, in between so much difficulty, continue with the support of the majority and with this political consensus that is still part of the Just for Future.
Stopped in a good part of our dialogue to talk about the internal reality and internal debates, because both inside and outside Cuba there is much expectation and concern about the destiny of the revolution. But of course this destiny is related to your international relations. There are much expectation about your participation in the UN General Assembly this month, that you step on U.S. territory in such a structured relations between Cuba and the United States that had been transforming with Obama administration. The arrival of Trump changed the situation, the relation. How does it change? What is the current status of that relation?
Fidel said that the answers to our challenges were in our history. Since the beginning of the revolution, there was a possibility of speaking of dialogue with the government of the states. And we clearly said this. Fidel said that we do not have a problem with the people of the states. We respect the people. We respect and admire the people, just like we love and cherish other peoples in Latin America. Our conflict, however, our differences are not with the people of America, but with the American governments, because of how they have acted against the revolution. In 1959, the first year of the revolution, when Fidel first visited the United States after the revolution, he wanted to speak to the government of the states, but the government of the United States immediately denied this possibility and did this in the worst of ways, even by approving an invasion to Cuba, which was a failure, and then was defined in history as the first great defeat of imperialism in Latin America. However, dialogue is built between two or more people. So dialogue also has rules. You cannot have a dialogue between people who are not equal. You cannot have hegemony from one side or pressure. You cannot have dialogue when one of the parties conditions the other for you to give up your sovereignty, to give up your independence. You cannot establish dialogue when one of the parties demands for you to be subject to what they want.
Those are the demands of Trump?
Yes, these are Trump's demands, the ones that have been throughout these years in how they exercise policies. When was it different? Well, in the last stage of President Obama's administration, and through a long period of talks and dialogue, a respectful dialogue, we opened the space to reestablish relationships. a process that we always consider was going to be long. Due to how things were carried out, there was no confidence at all. But we wanted to resume relationships when we still had a blockade.
But there were expectations from Cuba, more investments for the island.
Let me speak about this. At that moment, we established our relationships, and we started to be headed towards a process that was going to be the longest stage of standardizing things, normalizing things, and thus the standardization process needed to eventually lead to the elimination of the blockade. And while doing this, we're able to progress and to exchange, to keep in touch with different topics, and the United States government. The embassies were open in both countries, and we started working with something that Raúl defined in a perfect way, according to my point of view, where we could have a civilized relationship regardless of our differences in ideology. Those differences will not be solved. Our perspective in our ideology is completely different to the ones of the States government, but we're able to speak, to collaborate with this. There's a very important sector of companies in the United States that want to have relationships with Cuba and establish this. There's an important agricultural sector in the States that also want to have this exchange with Cuba. There's also a sector in the academia, in science, that want to open relationships with Cuba.
But how much weight do these sectors have to balance the position of Trump's administration?
Well, I think that the problem, that the blockade, the one that is able to go against the blockade is the Congress, not the president. Obama was, of course, more open and conciliatory towards this than the current president of the States. What has the current president done so far? Whilst we were progressing with these relationships? Well, on November, he dictated measures that are completely unacceptable in the relationship with Cuba. These measures, based on our perspective, have been dictated to comply with certain commitments with the mafia against Cuba that lives mainly in Miami. And we all know what's their historical position based on our revolution. But the measures that Trump created in November go against the opinion of the majority of the states. The last surveys in the country about Trump's position on Cuba and the relationship with the blockade, in the majority, people are against this blockade. They go against the possibility of American citizens. American citizens are limited in their visits to Cuba. They are warned when they visit Cuba that they shouldn't come to this country. They tell them stories against our country. And entrepreneurs in the United States are also limited to invest or to have any type of commercial or financial relationship with some Cuban companies that have been listed. It limits the citizens to visit Cuba
and Cuban families to come back. That will not change in the Trump era. We will not be able to live and approach again.
It limits Cubans to visit the States as well. The presence of Cuban personnel in our embassy.
You are accused of sonic attacks. Did you direct sonic attacks against the United States?
Well, they have included some paperwork for a visa, which is done through third countries that make everything more difficult and tangled up. They have planned as they have imposed, and with this they have created fake news and fake stories about some acoustic incidents that they have even spoken about. Acoustic attacks that we don't agree with because we haven't attacked anyone. Here we don't violate the rights of any diplomat. I think that if there's a place where the rights of citizens, of foreigners, and especially diplomats are respected is in the country of Cuba. They have a scaled up. They started with a story, and then American and Cuban scientists, well,
the governor
they said it was
asked for
fake.
assistance to Russia to attack the U.S. diplomats.
It's impossible. We would never request anyone to attack any other one. We don't have the will to attack. We defend ourselves from attacks. We have been attacked widely. We've been victims of terrorist attacks. We've been victims of a blockade, which is also an attack. We've been also victims of campaigns against Cuba. Our main leaders were tried to kill with terrorist attacks. Cuba doesn't attack. Cuba defends. Cuba is a supportive country. We always try to contribute for a better world. We, of course, need to acknowledge that relationships today are taking steps back. We still have some open channels for talks, and our position, I think this is very interesting. We have never been reluctant to keep talks, but we should speak as equals, a dialogue where we are respected, where we are not conditioning our sovereignty and our independence or our relationship with other countries, because we will not accept any imposition. We are not willing to give any concession in principles or in the relationship.
Your perspective is that there will not be communication with Donald Trump?
If this attitude from the government or states continues, then there will not be any dialogue, because dialogues are bilateral. We need to ask them if they want to continue with this dialogue. We should ask the president of the state if he wants to speak to Cuba, and if he wants to speak to Cuba, then he cannot do so from that perspective.
Will take some more minutes in this dialogue because there are structural topics that deserve doing that. Cuba's relation with Venezuela. Cuba declared is one of the countries that fastest declared against the attack against President Maduro. What is the vision you have of what comes for Venezuela after this assault against the president?
Well, you perfectly know this. We love Venezuela. And when you analyze the situation of Venezuela and the perspective of what's happening there, the first feeling that we have, beyond the love for Venezuela, for their people, for their history, for their leader, is also the acknowledgement, ourselves admiring what has been done for Venezuela. First, Venezuela with Chavez, the tradition was changed of a country that needs to play a very important role in Latin America, due to its condition as a country with so much natural wealth and also its wealth in resources and its history as well. And then Chavez broadened the horizons of a new Venezuela. Chavez, with his friendship with Fidel, which was also very important for Cuba, because Chavez was Fidel's best friend. And they were able to transcend not only for a project of Venezuela or Cuba, but for a project of Latin American integration, which was shown in different stages with the act like with
Those
UNASUR.
mechanisms are wounded to death, Mr. President?
Patricia, you're asking faster, or what can I answer? No, but I'm just joking. You're
Thank you
extremely
very much,
professional.
Mr. President.
Let's contrast Venezuela before Chavez and Venezuela after him. I think that the Bolivarian people have gotten so many benefits for conquests that they have also participated in. And these conquests have then been translated and shared with the rest of the countries of Latin America. through this mechanism of integration that also take up challenges as the ones that we're asking about. And the States always attempted through every means to overthrow Chavez's government by even using perverse practices. Remember that Chavez, well, there was a coup against Chavez, and they attempted to kill Chavez, and Chavez survived this coup. And Chavez continued being a very important leader for Venezuela and Latin America, as well as for the rest of the world. Chavez was a leader, was legitimately elected as president through different processes, with elections that have been acknowledged by the international community as honest and clean processes. And then Chavez passed, and Maduro became the president, a working president. So what the empire thought, that the president was not going to withstand these pressures, that the president was not going to be able to provide continuity to Chavez's legacy. And then they hit reality. I think that Maduro is a consequent leader that has a great commitment with Chavez's legacy. If you analyze this, you will realize that Chavez wasn't mistaken when he proposed Maduro. And the union between the military and the civilians and the people that have been hurt in the highest expression of non-conventional war by using media campaigns with fake news, by creating discomfort and looking for violence, creating violence in the society in order to create instability, and also creating blockades. There's, of course, a blockade against Venezuela, an economic blockade, a financial blockade against Venezuela. There's an oligarchy in Venezuela and the right wing that don't want to share the benefits of this conquest with the people. And what has Maduro and the government done, as well as the rest?
Will it resist?
They will endure, and they will win. And I think that they're enduring and they're winning. And they have constantly been able of finding a perspective to jump the hurdles. And this has been really difficult for the oligarchy in Venezuela, and also very difficult for the government of states to keep their position against Venezuela. Why? Well, it is clearly shown by the assassination attempt against Maduro. If you analyze this, you can see that here there are two things at stake. First, assassination attempt, which is the expression of lack of power against the victory of the revolution, and then silence about the crime that
what
demonstrates.
What is coming for a country after of an attempt of magnitude?
They will try to continue with their pressure. They will intensify their pressures. They will look for a fracture in Latin America so that others can become part of this. They will condition Latin American countries, and we know that people that have important roles in Trump's government going through Latin America, pressuring the countries, creating a position against Venezuela. That people are firm and they acknowledge what Venezuela has done. And it's also related to one of the questions he asked. They have also tried to divide, to break the unity.
Is Ecuador leaving Alba, Colombia from UNASUR? That's why I'm asking you, because Venezuela has been a reference in these integration. Are they wounded?
Everything that's happening, Patricia, from my perspective, is a platform for a neoliberal capitalistic transition that the government of the United States tries to impose in Latin America, because they never acknowledge the governments of Latin America with social processes and with revolutionary processes.
They didn't shield themselves enough, President?
I think that the revolutionary process was shielded. However, they're complex, especially when they try to change the basis. Americans don't want Cuba to happen again in any other place of Latin America. Remember that during the first years, the opposition, the oligarchy of Cuba went to the States, and they started their war from the States. In Venezuela, the oligarchy is there still. The counter-revolution is there, inside the country. Encouraged from all perspectives by the American administration. But what did ALBA TCP meant? Well, I don't think that any other process of integration of any kind regionally in such little time could have been more successful than ALBA. With ALBA, immediately, in a few years, 4 countries were able to eliminate literacy with a method that was created by Cuba, the Yo Si Puedo method. And the achievements of ALBA in 4 countries, well, it was the dream of many peoples and countries. And I always think Cuba was declared a country free of illiteracy after revolution. 50 years have to go by for the rest of the countries to get rid of illiteracy through collaboration, through cooperation. That in solidarity, the solidarity that we want in order to change how the world is globalized today. We don't want hegemony, we want solidarity.
But if that is so good, why is Ecuador leaving from ALBA and Colombia from UNASUR?
This globalization, this solidarity, well, this expression of solidarity and one for globalization, led with ALBA TCP, for most of people to freely see, have their side back. So if someone has character they cannot see just because of that, this is a very easy operation. So this is how we progress with social programs. Petrocaribe, that was a platform of energy to provide sustainability and security to the peoples in the Caribbean, with an altruistic position of Venezuela to share one of the resources that leads to war in the world. And wars are created because of this, and Venezuela is sharing this with the Caribbean. So ALBA TCP has a lot of value since its foundation for it to be broken. I think that there are many of us who are committed to continue with ALBA TCP.
Departure of Ecuador and UNASUR the same, Mr. President?
Same thing with UNASUR. And I think that the fractures have been due to this strategy of colonialism. Those who cannot handle what's happening in these years will be subject to the empire and they will face the consequences of this. But those of us who defend from our conviction the integration of Latin America and the Caribbean, the unity of these 2 regions, being aware that we could be the region with more peace and prosperity in the world, then history will prove us right. We're going to see what happens with time, and we've already seen the benefits of this type of collaborations, of this type of solidarity that is not selfish, but it comes from a clear perspective, an ECLAC provided union within diversity. And that's why, because of this position of unity, was able to build a claim of peace for Latin America and the Caribbean that now is being threatened when there are countries that want to build American bases, while others from the borders try to create complex situations for the revolution. But I think that we will overcome this. It was a very important insight of the left wing in Latin America in the Sao Paulo Forum, which took place in Cuba in July. The left wing in Latin America is aware of the challenges that we have ahead of us, and we need to become integrated. We need to be together. Only divided could this social
You were talking
construction
about
be
peace, and of
destroyed.
course I can't stop asking the role of Cuba in the dialogue process in Colombia. The dialogues with ELN are still kept to the moment we are discussing here, but there are serious concern about compliance by the Colombian state and also former FARC commanders regarding the agreements in Havana and then in Bogota. What is your idea regarding the peace in Colombia and the position of your government of continuing accompanying?
Peace is a necessary process for Colombia, and we have a contribution that is based on our principles to defend peace anywhere in the world. We always aspire for peace, universal peace that could ease an international economic order that is different to the one we have today. We are always guarantors of this for peace. We offer our space, our possibilities to develop a dialogue. However, we don't interfere with them, also due to ethics and principles. We want to facilitate the possibility of parties to speak, to solve the problems. The problems in Colombia should be solved by Colombia, just like the problems in Venezuela that should be solved by Venezuelans. That's why we need to support the cause of Venezuela, and that's why we also need to support the struggle for peace.
Even if I still have many on the list, as you can see, the meaning, your meaning to the success of López Obrador in Mexico for this new moment of integration and revision of mechanisms in the region. What do you think about this success?
Mexico is a very important country in the region. Mexico is a country that we cherish. We have a lot of historical relationships as well as cultural. It's not just because that the centenary generation found a space in Mexico to prepare themselves for the revolution. And Mexico and Cuba have always shared the perspective. When everyone was away, Mexico kept relations with Cuba.
There was a time of problems.
Yeah, but from the government. However, the peoples have always been together. They love each other widely. And this cannot be broken by anybody. López Obrador is a glimpse of hope for Mexico, for Latin America, and the Caribbean. A left-wing government of Obrador with his personality this somehow balances the problems for the relationship of forces that have been during the last years in America. López Obrador showed his position based on the Lima Group, and López Obrador, beyond his commitment with the renewal of Mexico, the renovation of the country, and the development of it, to continue working in order to stop inequalities in Mexico.
Will Cuba be willing to help?
Of course, of course. And he has spoken, and Cuba will participate and support. And we've been very happy
when we
with
started
the victory.
this dialogue, I was asking for these 4 months of government, what have they meant? And you talked about administration, your vision, and then we started talking about the intense debates in Cuban society. But this last question is to the man, the grandfather, the husband. How well have you complied with your grandfather role, and about the music? And the last question, how many times have you talked with Raúl in these 4 months? Let's start.
Let's start with the last one. I said this during an intervention in the closing session of the National Assembly, which took place in July. And I think that no one is as lucky as I am as a president, because I have the support of the general and the first secretary of the party with all the history that he has as the leader of the Cuban Revolution. We speak almost every day. Raul knows how hard we work. He's always asking about what we do. He requests information about the things that we propose. He participates in meetings and debates. He provides a lot of advice very sincerely. And with no vanity at all, or trying to impose or limit our actions with something. And this, well, is a very personal feeling of mine. I always think of him as a father who guides me, at the same time allows me to walk. And this is not seen only as a personal perspective, but we have been doing this while carrying out his roles and hierarchies as the secretary of the party. And the people like this, they feel very confident with this, just like when Fidel got sick and gave his responsibility to Raul. He was always present, Fidel, and Raul stated he was going to ask Fidel always about the main problems of the nation. So the people are aware that Raul is active, is present, and that is always aware of what we're doing. So everything that's happening comes in a community of commitments of the party, of the government, of the nation, with the people. And I feel very secure with this, as well as the ministers, as the government. We feel secure because we have this guidance and because of how he works. When he proposed my name to become the first vice president, of course I would never even thought about something as such. I never thought I was going to be the person that would eventually occupy that position. And he explained that in such paternal but sad demanding way, giving me all the confidence in the world, but under the conviction that continuity was required, because he was fully aware that when the time was right, the next generation should have been the one taking over. So this is his conviction. He hasn't done a concession, and when the people have asked him to continue, he said no. He said, we need to start with example. He isn't only thinking about now, he's thinking about the continuity, the future of the revolution. When other generations as mine, as the following ones, will never have what the others did, what Fidel and Raul did for leading our country. So it is an experience that has a revolutionary experience and beauty, and it's an experience that also shows the example to follow, but also brings a lot of commitment. We are walking down the roads that they created. I am taking baby steps behind the steps of giants. Two giants in their morals, in their ethics, in their revolutions. And I look around and I wonder, well, I am not the only one walking. We're all together. So we often speak about a collective guidance, about a place where beyond the commitment, there's a performance which is based on the big and the small, on a strategy but detail. And these are convictions that have been brought to us by Fidel and Raul. And when you see the provinces, when you go around, you see that there is a brave people, an educated people, very committed, and very entrepreneurial as well, finding all the solutions that they find, and that is also showing love and confidence. I personally do a lot of effort to do things that happen publicly. I'm an introvert. So when I see people, a crowd of people during my tours, it's difficult for me. But I always say, I will speak with the people, and then I see the crowd, I start talking to them, I ask them questions, I tell them about what we're doing, because people always want to know. Some speak about problems, about the things that we're lacking, we explain them, what we're doing, what we are projecting. But people show such a feeling of appreciation, not to the person who's sharing that, but they see this as an expression of support for continuity. And they always say, don't let Fidel or Raúl down. Long live Fidel and long live Raúl. So this is a lot of support, but also a lot of commitment. So I tend to think, what a legacy I have ahead of me, what a great responsibility. So you need to understand both love and commitment. So you need to be stronger and tell them we will go ahead because we're not alone. We have these people with us and we need to work collectively. We need to allow the people to participate, as the revolution has always shown. And in a recent council, I spoke with the members, and I said, with such a brave people, so heroic and committed, the only reason in our lives is to give them everything, by doing, by creating, by working restlessly and being faithful to these people, which is also being loyal to the revolution, to Fidel and to Raúl. And this is my conviction. So this is also shown inside my family. You are a social being all the time. You are part of a collective of friendships, of people where you have responsibility inside a team. And there's also a family. My family has been understanding and supportive. The guys are very critical. And they tell me things that need to be improved, that come from their own perspective, from their own lives. So there's also a dialogue at home, which is the same one that happens in society.
A brainstorm like this interview.
And I tell them, come on, we're not going to speak about this at home, but we always do, because it must be genuine, because I don't think there's a single home in Cuba that is not debating about the reality of our country. My wife, very capable woman, she helps me a lot. She is an academic, specialized in literature and culture, specifically from Cuba. She encouraged me all the time. She is very objective when analyzing problems, of criticizing things. She is my counterpart, and we share many common interests, maybe all even. So I share my ideas with her. I ask her for her opinion on my ideas, on the things that I want to project. I asked her about her ideas on how I wrote my speech, and she always helps me with this. And the rest is also shared as a family. Music, that is so important spiritually. We share music, we share poetry. 2 of the 3 boys are artists. So at home, whenever we have some free time, on Sunday mainly, at lunch, I always tell them, we always need to have lunch together, whatever time I arrive home. So at least on Sunday, we try to have lunch together, and then I listen to the boys, they sing.
You sing also?
I'm a terrible singer, but I do. and they mock me immediately. They say it's impossible for me to learn how to sing, but still. We share, of course, also with our partners, with some friends.
And your grandchild makes you smile.
Of course, he makes me smile. And I confirm something that my mom used to say. You're very demanding with your children. However, you allow your grandchildren to do whatever they want.
We have talked to the grandfather, President of Cuba. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Patricia. You know how much it means for us. teleSUR. I don't like interviews, actually. I would rather be the interviewer than interviewee. This is my first interview, and of course the members of the Cuban press will be happy about this. But I will shortly speak to them. There have been some requests of Cuba Debate to speak with me, and also from other newspapers. But everyone will be happy that the first one was with teleSUR, because teleSUR is also from Cuba. teleSUR means Latin America, and it's also the one that, as a media, is playing an important role for the emancipating content of Latin America to be part of the world, and to be also the counterpart of the colonizing perspective is trying to be imposed. So thank you and all your people. We've been very comfortable.
We hope the reactions of our users through our social networks and platforms in teleSUR in English and Spanish. We have talked from Havana, the Palace of Government, with the President of Cuba. Thank you very much.